Remarkable careers don't just happen, they are defined by a person's culture, global culture, and the culture. It takes a bit of risk, an ability to adapt, and a lot of resilience. I'm Leila Fatah, and welcome to Cultural Voices, a series of unfiltered conversations with people shaping and representing culture and creativity. In this episode, I chat with London born, self taught filmmaker and creative director Margot Bowman, whose work dives deep into community, identity, and the power of storytelling. Her debut narrative feature, Wildcard, is currently in development with the British Film Institute. She has worked with everyone from Adobe to Dr. Martens, Carhartt, Tate, Dazed, Channel 4, the list goes on. From creative direction to co-founding a digital art gallery to award-winning documentaries to bold, visually striking films, her distinctive style creates poetic, immersive storytelling. Nice to see you, Margot. It's been a few years now that we've known each other, and I'm really, really, really stoked to be able to run through your background and how you got to where you are today. So, you always talk about like this Camden club culture, and how it links to sort of creativity and community. How did this upbringing and sort of personal background shape the way you see the world today? Tell me more about that. Because I also have a club culture, love. So it's great to hear from someone else too.
Yeah. I think it's like it's a good starting point. For me, it was like kind of a mixture of two things. Like one, just growing up within like walking distance of Camden Lock Market, which like at the time was actually a really interesting place. And I think in particular there was this one shop there called Cyberdog, which I think some people will remember.
Yes.
Or be
I remember
or be familiar with.
Yes.
So I would be like, Cyberdog, for like anyone who doesn't know, is a kind of club wear, club lifestyle like store where they sell like outfits and accessories, but like the look was very kind of like, I actually don't know what it's called. It's like dance, like hard. So it was like, furry bikinis, neon, like accessories, just like really crazy. Everything was like a UV color. And the store, you would go in and it was like psytrance, kind of like steampunk. Like there were like, all the walls were covered in this like textured UV gloop, and there were like sculptures, and it was just like, it was mental. Like I'd obviously never been anywhere like that. And I think that store really like was such a kind of pivotal, like defining experience for me, because I immediately understood that you could world build using culture. And it wasn't just about the clothes or the music or the kind of, one individual aspect. It was actually about bringing all these things together to create these like alternative universes. And I think that's something I've taken with me like throughout my whole kind of career. And it was something I saw like at home as well. Like both my parents aren't British. My mum is from New Zealand, my dad's South African. And I was like really aware, I think, growing up, of just the idea that like, there's like three ways to do things. There's like the way your mum does it, the way your dad does it, and then there's the way the place you live does it. And just this idea of like multiple realities, I think, was always really part of how I understood the world and how I made sense of the world. So kind of that's something I've definitely taken into like my career. But that sort of turned into just more like, being in London, like growing up in London, going out a lot as a teenager, going out as like, my 20s, and kind of going to like the tail end of like drum and bass and jungle raves, and really just understanding that there were these places, nightclubs were these places where there was this huge sense of like, there was a real like sense of universality that the music created, and the kind of rules of the space created this like new social contract. And I think for me, again, that was like really powerful and something I always want to do with my work, whether that's working in any medium. I kind of want everyone to be able to like show up as themselves, but have a kind of communal experience. So yeah, like lots to say, but that's kind of, I guess, like the foundation of it.
And it's amazing because I totally hear you. I mean, that's totally my background. And I actually have a photo of me of a pair of pants I bought
at Cyberdog. I was
No
looking at my archive and I
way. What
found
were they
this
like?
picture of me from back in the day. And I remember it because I was like, I remember buying it then with these really, really, really tight black pants. I used to be like real raver. And it had these like plastic bits all the way down the leg. I mean, it was definitely from Cyberdog. But it was so different at the time, Cyberdog, especially in the market of Camden at the time, you know, and it was dark, wasn't it? When you walked in, it felt like you were walking into a club. Very
Exactly.
influential
It
and
was like
really,
you
really
walked into a
different at the
club.
time. It was, yeah. It's like you're walking into a club just there as well. But I think it's still there. Is it? Is it still there? Not sure.
I think it is
That
still
was
there,
definitely back
but
then.
I think
Yeah.
you're right about it being really different is so key, because it's like now I think we're really used to like a more sort of
Yeah. But not the
homogenized
time.
like landscape.
Yeah.
No, like it's really its own very specific thing, and yeah, it's like iconic.
Just iconic. So then, what was the move to New York? So I know you were out in New York, and it's good you talked about your sort of specific family influence, because I feel like, you know, and I talk about this a lot, this kind of background influence and culture, you know, blended with your personal interests and cultures, and kind of how that is always a foundation. It's definitely a foundation of my life and career. Tell me about New York. Why and why did you move there in the first place? And when was that? And how deep into your career was that?
I moved to New York in 2016, but I think I'd kind of mentally been ready to leave London for like at least 3 years. I think I just found like at the time I've had quite a like diverse sort of creative career, working in like different mediums. And I think one thing I found really challenging was just like I was making these kind of multimedia sort of art projects that brands were like paying for, whether that was like animations or kind of interactive work. So I was just like making a lot of different type of work, and I was just finding it really frustrating that there was like a ceiling in London. There was just like a level of kind of like brief that I couldn't kind of get above, because the work I was making didn't fit into like one specific category. So I couldn't kind of go down one of the like routes. You know what I mean? I wasn't an illustrator. I wasn't an artist. I wasn't like a filmmaker at that time. So it was quite difficult to sort of navigate my way through, you know, just like the kind of career that would make sense to other people, basically. And I was just like spending increasingly like doing these projects. If they took me overseas, I would kind of be like working remotely, and like, you know, I just was out of the UK a lot, and I really felt like I just needed to grow. I think it was a real coming from a place of like a desire to like make more money, but also just to like have that kind of experience of personal growth. And after Brexit, I just didn't feel like I wanted to be a part of what was happening in the UK. I felt really alienated by it. You know, obviously both my parents are immigrants. I just didn't, you know, you're just kind of like, I'm just going to unsubscribe from this for a minute, because I just don't feel like it's necessarily the place I'm going to put my energy into. And New York was like amazing. I moved there and I was creative director of Boiler Room, which was like a really incredible experience. Mostly because I think when a lot of British creative people move to the US, they end up making more sort of like commercial work. But I was thrown into this like just really authentic, like culturally driven environment where there were brands and we worked with brands, but we navigated kind of culture in this just very on the ground way. And it was an incredible experience to like, you know, spend time in Detroit and like just really understand how important like music is as a just lifeblood that fuels like an ecosystem of people who are just not served by the state. And just really, I think it was a period of like a lot of personal growth, and I'm really grateful for that, because I don't think I would have understood myself and like my voice in the way that I do now without being thrown into just the level of competition, the size of the market, and I think also a really prevalent conversation around like race and identity that has just like only like deepened my own understanding of what it means to like connect, whether that's just on a personal level or through like work. So yeah, it was like really positive experience. I worked at Boiler Room for a couple of years, and then I left and I was consulting for Universal Music Group, which was like amazing, just working at a completely different scale.
Yes.
And did like an interesting experience of really being in a kind of corporate environment.
Yes.
And what does that mean? And what does that look like? And I was kind of planning on staying. Like, I didn't ever think I'd come back to the UK. But on the 1st of March 2020, I had to come back to renew my work visa. And like, I came back, I got my visa, and then obviously COVID was kind of kicking off. And like 3 days later, Trump brought in the travel ban, and I wasn't able to return to the United States. So
that timing is crazy.
It was
you
crazy.
know, anytime
was
anyone says March 2020, you're like, you know, it's such a moment in time where you're like, everything changed. And I remember we had lunch, didn't we? And you were telling me about how you were going to go back, and then you actually physically couldn't get back because of the lockdown, travel ban, and whatever. So such an interesting thing. How do you feel about that now? Because I think at the time, obviously, you were intending to go back. You know, that's where your life was. That's where your stuff was. That's where everything was. And now, a few years down the line, you know, you've settled back in and it's all good. I wonder how it would have been if you'd gone back. Imagine that. It's funny how the twists and turns
I think it's
happen, don't they? Yeah.
Totally. I think it was like, you know, for me, that was such a like ego death experience, because like all of my kind of like physical possessions that I'd like used to create my identity in America, all my clothes, my books, my furniture, I didn't have any of that stuff. So it was weird because it was like kind of starting again, but in the place that I was from. And just, I think looking back at it now, it's like, I'm like, I don't really believe that like things happen for a reason. I think that kind of oversimplifies things. But I think it just taught me that you're not in control. Like, that was the hardest thing about it, was really learning to accept and just surrender to like the transformation that has kind of taken place. And I've been really, I'm grateful for the transformation. And it's interesting because obviously I've still got British friends that live in the US. And for them, I see them struggling now, like with what's going on in the political situation. They just don't know when to leave. Basically, they're like, should I leave now? Should I leave next year? Should I leave? Should I wait it out? And I think in a way, in a way, having that choice taken away from me kind of just forced something. But I think I'm in quite a unique position because, like, obviously I work as a filmmaker and a creative director, but in terms of filmmaking, like, the UK is kind of designed to really develop like emerging voices. So like BFI, Film 4, BBC Films, like they are all set up in a way to like support you with your first feature. And I just don't think I would have had access to like that kind of public support and resources in the United States. So it's kind of in a way, it's kind of given me something I really needed and I really wanted. But it's just been a lesson to sometimes you have to just surrender and kind of make it work. And that's the art, is just making it work and exactly, and surrendering. And but yeah, it was like a really challenging period, like in COVID, when people were like, I'm just working from home, nothing's changed. I was like, fuck you. Like, I don't have any clothes, but I mean, obviously relative. Like I don't know where I live. But it's made me really like appreciate. I hate this country. I hate the country I've been living in. It also, I think it made me really aware of like how great like London is, because obviously 2020 was such a like
me too. Yeah,
it is, you know. And I think the other thing is like, if for me, like me leaving over Brexit, or not over Brexit, but you know, that period during Brexit, not kind of wanting to be here, but I was kind of like, if I want the place I'm from to be the way I want it to be, I have to be a part of that. It's not just going to happen. Like, so I'm always like, my friends that live in the US, I'm like, we need all the good people to come back. Like, come on, we need you. You know,
come back.
No, but we do. I think it's like, as someone who's first generation British, it's like, well, what does it mean to be second generation? Like, what does it mean to kind of really contribute to the ecosystem. And like, I really like that deeply kind of motivates me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think, I think this is where I know you that way as well. Like you're motivated by sort of community, and you're motivated by humanity, and that's what I adore about you. And so it was really great to watch your talk, your Adobe talk around permission, mushrooms, and creativity. It felt like a defining moment where something clicked for you somehow. Tell me about the shift. Tell me about this kind of realization. Yeah, let us know a bit more about that. I don't know if that was a moment, but it kind of felt like something shifted from that.
Totally.
What do you think?
I think it was like it was one of those moments where you find a framework to talk about how you feel. And like, I think for me, basically in like the like awful winter of like 2020, 2021, I read this book called Entangled Life, which is a really incredible book all about fungi and mushrooms and how, they are, how successful they are and all the things they do. And basically they do it all through collaboration and by this kind of like decentralized process of like networks and collaboration. And that was the thing that I was like, wow, like this is so incredible. And it just inspired me to stay in the UK and like really be a part of kind of my own ecosystem. But I think it's interesting as I've like just grown up really as a person and like developed my kind of creative practice, I think I've constantly had to like look for analogies for people to understand what I'm doing. Because I think people have always felt like what I did was interesting, but they didn't necessarily understand because I didn't work in one discipline. And what I love about filmmaking, right? What I love about filmmaking and also creative direction, because I feel like they're very like symbiotic, but it's just this idea of kind of world building. It's storytelling and it's world building, but it's like, how do we do that? And ultimately, like we do that through collaboration. And I think the way, the like mycelium networks have this decentralized approach to what they do. So you don't have traditional hierarchies, and instead you kind of everyone is empowered to do what they're best at. And I've just found that that's a model that works in my personal relationships, in my professional relationships. When I think about my family, like I think I really want to, it's like a blueprint that I'm trying to kind of adopt into how I show up, because the evidence is there how successful it is for this whole other kind of life form. And I don't know, sometimes you have to look at the small things to understand the big things.
And I think, interestingly, I think you say that as something you're trying to implement. I think you do that naturally. I think what you found is almost a framework, as you said, but it is something you've always done, I feel, without really thinking about why that is. And I feel like that comes with experience. You kind of go, after writing my book, I was like, that's the red thread. There's actually been the same thing I've always done in different forms and different formats, but never really articulate what it was. And I think that's what it feels like for you, because although it feels like a defining moment, something shifted, actually, for me, you've always worked in that way, with ecosystem, with network, with community. That's not that different, you know what I mean, for me. But maybe now you've just found a way to crystallize it, articulate it, and can now sort of like identify what it is, maybe. What do you think? Because I feel like that's hard to do sometimes. You're just in it. Yeah. And mushrooms are cool.
Totally. No, I do think, I know this sounds stupid, but I think mushrooms are like trendy. Like I think mushrooms are like post-COVID, mushrooms are like their, health supplements as a kind of microdose. No, but people love mushrooms. And I think it was just like you're right. Like it was a great way. It was kind of a pop culture way to translate, what I guess is like at the core of my practice. And
exactly.
And as someone who's often been misunderstood, or not misunderstood, but I think people just haven't completely understood me. It felt like a moment where I could kind of communicate it. And I'm sure you know how that feels.
I do. Tell me about choosing between personal beliefs and professional expectations. How do you navigate that? what does that mean? Is there any examples you can give? And this can be anything really. So, have you ever faced those situations? And yeah, let us know how, how you address that.
Totally. I think a big part of it is just like, personal beliefs and professional expectations. I mean, I think I've kind of avoided that, to be honest, by not working in one specific discipline. It's only now, like, after I turned 30, I was like, okay, I'm really going to kind of commit to this like discipline of filmmaking. And then you're like more kind of measuring yourself against, what the professional expectations are. Should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? I think you can kind of get caught up in all of that. But I think prior to that point, because I was working in so many disciplines, I sort of could like avoid this idea of like professional expectation. And instead I was like motivated by my own personal beliefs. But what I found was that in the avoidance, it was kind of difficult because I was like working in all these different mediums, but I couldn't really go deep, like in the mediums, whether it was like clothing design or, web design or interactive artwork or whatever it was, illustration. It was like, there was like a level of depth I couldn't get to, whether that was just because of the budgets I had access to or just because of the time I had. And so I think that kind of point of like, that of making that choice was like, okay, now I'm actually going to face personal beliefs and professional expectations. And I'm not going to kind of avoid one by just, setting myself up in a certain way. I'm going to like actually confront them. And I think most of the time professional expectations just aren't very useful. Like, I think as long as you know what your values are and you know how you want to show up and you know why you're doing it, I think that's really like the only thing that matters. I think professional expectations most of the time were like established by, a version of society that like probably you don't fit into or wasn't designed with you in mind. So yeah, I think like today we're kind of like living in this like strange world where like people's professional expectations are completely informed by what they see on social media, other people doing, whether that's they're winning this award or they've got this new job or they're living a certain lifestyle that their income affords them or whatever. I think that's how we understand our professional expectations. But just like obviously try not to go there because it's just not going to be useful. I think knowing why you're doing something is so important and just having the time and space to reflect on that. That should be your own professional expectation. I think setting those things up for yourself is the most important thing.
And I think as well, just to add to that, because I totally believe, I mean, I hear you, I personally as well have created my thing, because I don't have a specific skill, but I've gone, what is the thing I'm kind of good at, and then built something around it. But I think also as we go into a world of AI and this completely new world that we're about to enter, also from politics, from media, technology, it's almost an opportunity to create new things and new ways of working. So I think we're going to have to lean even more into ourselves and kind of what we're trying to do and not compare to the past, because you can't compare apples and pears, right? So so it's a really interesting time for me. I'm excited about transformation. I'm excited about things shifting forward, even though at the moment it feels like it's rolling back. But I also feel like that means that there is opportunity, because I think there's always opportunity in chaos, to be honest. It's just what we all decide to do, and then hopefully center around humanity versus just, competitiveness. I mean, that would be the ideal situation. Anyway, let's talk about resilience. Okay, because obviously resilience is super important today. I mean, I feel like that's one of the key things that we should be teaching our children, I think, and young people. Is your personal challenge or failure that shaped your resilience?
What happened to me during COVID, that was a level of resilience and just patience. Like it was, and I think to kind of have everything I'd like worked for the last 4 years kind of just like erased, and to really have to sort of like start from scratch that was like extremely difficult. And just the frustration with like not having the agency to just get on a plane and go to the place where, you know, I was paying tax. I had like my visa. I had done all the things. I jumped through all the hoops. So I think just the resilience to like have faith that, you know, at some point it was going to work out. Things were going to make sense again. I think that whole period, I just felt like, you know, if I'd say like 2 years, I really felt like I was just like swimming uphill, and it was just like, you're just against the current and nothing is kind of clicking because so much is out of place that you're not able to get that like momentum that, you know, you get when, you know, your things are set up and then one thing leads to another thing leads to another thing. But my life was such a mess that I just wasn't able to kind of get that sort of flow going. And for me, like boxing was like a huge part of it, like learning to box and then just like boxing regularly. Yeah, it was like a huge part of just amazing building up my own mental resilience and like my physical resilience. But I think my mental resilience was something that I really, it's like I'm a real believer in like the kind of somatic practice that you can bring to what you're doing. And just like, I really need that time where I'm not on my phone. I'm not thinking about anything. I'm just kind of like breathing and I'm like in the present. And I find building up resilience in the present allows me to like take that kind of resilience into the rest of my life. But it's like in a way, like I wish people didn't have to be resilient, because I think resilience infers that like, you know, you kind of get knocked down and then you get knocked down and then you get knocked down. And for a lot of people who we talk about being resilient, a lot of that is like systemic. So I think it can be something that like, in a way, like I you know, I'm thinking of specific people who maybe have experienced a lot of like grief due to their like political position, or, you know, just like where their family's from or whatever. And like, I wish they didn't have to be resilient, you know? But I think in the kind of short-term experiences like we're talking about, I think it's about just having people around you, like a small number of people around you who are just able to hold you and give you grace. Because I think in those like challenging periods, it's not always best behavior. And having a physical practice that you can just process a lot of that energy and frustration through. And like, just like really at least taking it as an opportunity to reflect on like why you're on the path you're on and where you're actually going. I think in those moments of like challenge, when there's like room, you know, sometimes that's the worst part about them, is you've got like a lot of negative space. That I think should be an opportunity to like reflect on where you're going and why you're going there.
Yeah, I love that.
The other thing is, I think in those periods, I think when it's almost like you almost have like nothing to lose because you've like lost so much already. And I think that is like an opportunity for growth in a really significant way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I constantly talk about my own personal career not having a plan B. You know, you have to make it work. You got to push forward and you got to move forward, but it's not easy. It's not easy. And, you know, in an ideal world, no one would need it. But unfortunately, the world that we live in, we have to also build that as well. How do you think that has prepared you within your career, like to think differently or to lead? Like has that shaped how you engage with people? You know what I mean? That coming through something like that. Yeah.
Definitely. I also just think like, you know, I was at St. Martens like the year of the 2008 Lehman's crash. So like I'm kind of part of that generation where it was like, it was the recession, you know, then it was like this, then it was like that, then it was COVID, then there was another rest of this. Like, I feel like my whole career or my whole like working life, there's been some like disaster. And everyone's always saying like, oh, I know this year's bad, but last year was great. And it's just kind of like, I think you just get used to the odds not really being stacked in your favor. And that's just the way the game operates. Like, I also think just like being freelance, you have to deal with so much, especially like directing, you deal with so much rejection that it's kind of like, you just get used to it. Like, I really think you get used to it and you get used to the idea, you just move on quickly like that. maxim, like fail fast. I think that was something from like St. Martens that we got taught. That's probably one of the most useful things I've taken into like my working life.
Yeah.
Because I think when you think about how that applies to leadership, it also allows you to like just be compassionate and adaptable. Like sometimes things don't work out. That's not necessarily someone's fault, but like let's just figure out what the creative solution is. And I think that's
it.
The place you always want to take it back to. And that's why everyone's showed up, right? Is to make creative solutions. So I think as long as you're like, you're always looking at that side of it, it allows you not to get stuck in the kind of problems.
Yeah. Because I think, you know, it can destroy people, you know, they might feel a certain way about something, you know, but it is, you know, I always talk about anything like that being an opportunity to learn. And to go, okay, what am I going to not do the next time, or how I'm going to make sure that I set this up so, you know, there's less opportunity for whatever to happen. So, you know, I think it does build and allows you to grow, you know, for all the reasons we just talked about. Has this given, you know, any of your lived experiences, has it given you like a unique advantage or insight in that solving problems? Is there any specific example that you can give us where you found that creative solution to something that felt, you know, more difficult?
Yeah, I guess like I'm dyslexic, which is something I was like diagnosed with as a child. And I think that's something that I guess I've always, I mean, I think I was lucky in the sense that like I was like, at the time I was diagnosed, there was still a lot of like state funding around learning difficulties. So like I remember doing my exams and I got like extra time. And then when I went to art school, they were like, you used to get this insane package of like a laptop, a printer, like a voice recorder.
Really?
Like honestly, it was amazing. Yeah, no, it was incredible. And also it was all like insured. So like if it ever got stolen, they replace it. But thanks like that period in time. But I think it just like having this kind of positive feedback around this like neurodivergence, it allowed me to understand that, you know, I was different, but it was like a good thing. And I kind of always knew, okay, there's going to be something I'm just not going to be the best at. I'm not going to be the best at spelling, you know, but that's fine. Like, you know, that's just not something I'm good at. And I think it really allowed me to see myself as someone who was unique, but that there were like positive things about that uniqueness. And I always kind of knew my brain was different. And I'd say that's probably just allowed me to like engage in problem solving in a way that feels true to me. But also if something doesn't work out, I'm kind of like, you know, I don't take it too personally because I know there's like a whole range of things I'm just not biologically the best person for.
And I think it's interesting also because, you know, thankfully, actually, there was that support for you. I think that was also quite new, I would assume, you know, people struggled for years, you know, and it was such a taboo and it was just so negative. So I'm glad, and I'm really glad that those conversations are happening at the moment and are exciting, you know, and doesn't feel so, let's hide someone away in the corner, or that feels negative. It's about different perspectives and it's much needed, to be honest. So I'm super excited about neurodiversity, completely just from an opportunity and innovation point of view. You know what I mean? I feel like that's really, really fantastic. But with that, and I know you personally, so, you know, I know you're empathetic, but what do you think the role of empathy plays today in leadership? How important is that? And what do you think the need is for that or not? You tell me what your thoughts are.
I think it's just at the core of everything because like, I think if people don't care, like there's a whole like quiet quitting movement, right? So like if people don't care about what they do, I think they just won't try hard. Like it's just sort of simple. I think it's such a like competitive environment and people are like going through so much. Like we're living through such a chaotic period of like deep transformation on like every single level. I think that like work just needs to show up as a generative environment. Like I think we've all had really positive experiences through work where we've grown and we've like learned about ourselves and all of that stuff. And I think obviously sometimes you just need to get down to it, But I don't think that it ever needs to be, you know, uncomfortable, exploitative, etc., etc. I just don't believe to get the best results, that's the approach you need to take. And I think if you're going to take the other road where you're kind of like leading with light and you're like empowering people and you're really making it something that people actually enjoy, like I think empathy is like at the absolute bedrock of that.
Yeah. And I feel like, you know, going forward, I think it becomes more and more important. You know, I talk about that a lot in the book, and kind of the new skills for leadership, you know, beyond just the expertise, the technical expertise of, you know, I think prior years, this core of empathy and understanding and listening and learning. I think it's interesting because it is a generational shift actually in the workplace and how things happen. And it's, you know, it's the right way to do it. I think there's a way to go still. But I feel like that's something that I feel quite passionate about, and I'm constantly challenging myself and learning about that as well. So I agree. I just feel like it's super important. I think that people don't understand the importance of that because, you know, and tell me as well from yourself, like, you know, that empathy enables unique perspectives, you know, it makes people feel a way. Any success stories from you where you're like, you know, there was this person who felt a certain way and, you know, that perspective really helped the project or really helped the whatever. Is there anything that you can think of that comes to mind around that where, you know, embracing and leveraging a unique personality or perspective really move things forward? And how you did that?
I think like a lot of my projects I've worked as a co-director or just like in a very like deeply kind of collaborative way. And for example, like Coming Home, the documentary short that I co-directed with my friend Naeem Naif, you know, that was such a like empathetic creative process because the film is about a group of Palestinian American dancers who live in Brooklyn. And, you know, even though I'd made like a number of docs that were kind of about dance or music and how that like built community, you know, I'm obviously not Palestinian and Naeem is Palestinian American, comes from a documentary making background. And so in a way, we had this like really nice kind of like deep sense of like skill. It was like deeper than like a skill exchange, but like ultimately we couldn't make the film without each other. And like, I think just the sense of like true empathy where you're really, you know, you kind of let go of how you feel about something and you really tune into like, how does this work for like the organism of the project? Obviously there was like myself, Naeem, there were other, you know, creative heads of department involved. And then there was like Freedom Debka Group, who's the group we made the film about, you know, like what their needs are, what they want. Like, I think I feel like documentary making particularly is a like deeply empathetic practice because
I love documentaries. I love it. Yeah.
What other people, the people you're making the film about, the people you're making the film with, you know, what they, not just what they want, but like what direction they want to take the thing you're making in. It's a kind of like a collective experience. But I think particularly in that creative process, like working with Naeem so closely and just really, there was so much for me to learn about the culture and about the history and about, you know, the future and the present. And that was something that like, I wouldn't have been able to do in such an empathetic way without the support of him and also the other people around us. I think so much of empathy is also about grace. It's just about like giving people grace to show up as a human being, you know, as someone who maybe isn't perfect, who doesn't know everything. And like, I think empathy is really about not only like feeling what the other person is feeling, but also like giving them grace because you know how they're feeling. So I think like, going on that journey, you know, we made that film for like 2 years. There were political events happening at the time that made, you know, the creative process challenging just in terms of like, you know, we couldn't necessarily reach out to Palestinian collaborators when there was like a real like violent uproar in the occupation and all of these kind of like nuances. They're not just like things that are happening. They are affecting the project, but they are also like deeply intrinsic to the kind of grace that you need to extend to like yourself, the process, everybody. It's like you have to show up with empathy, otherwise you just can't make something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that a lot personally as well. So I think also and that's the difficult part. I don't think empathy is something that is, you can't fake it, right? You got to really give a shit, or else it just is going to be weird. You know what I mean? And I think that's why I enjoy watching your work, but also working with you, is that's centered to who you are. Like, really, it's it's a joy and it's a pleasure. So I'm sure that was, you're the perfect person to have done that kind of documentary and film, especially where we are at the moment. So let's jump into your creative expression and identity. So, and I was thinking, as you were talking about the mushrooms and decentralization, like, are you excited about Web3? Because obviously that is decentralized, because you were super early on, like, NFT and PGR and animation, blah, 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 what have you. But you also mix that well with kind of archival, kind of heritage, deeper stories, which I really enjoy. Tell me about this technology today and creativity. What are your thoughts? And where does that interest come from? Where does that come from?
I think for me, like, when we used to, so myself, Sean Frank, and Jolien Varley in like the 2010s had a GIF art gallery that we kind of ran online, and then we had some like pop-up exhibitions in London. And we made a t-shirt that said nostalgia is bullshit. And I think that is something that I've always kind of been like passionate about, that, I think when we look back into the past too much, we get distorted and we end up maybe with like the kind of political realities we're like living through at the moment, where, there's an idea that things were better in the past, but like, were they really better for who, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like there's a real like deep sense in me. I think it's just the optimist in me, the idea that we can make things better, and I think there's probably like a naivety in that, but like the idea that the best is yet to come, I think is something that I feel as a sort of core belief. And I guess my interest in technology kind of comes from that. And my thesis at St. Martens was about like mythology in a world of electronic media. And it was kind of about storytelling, online storytelling, and like, can we have empathy basically online? That was sort of like one of the big themes in the thesis. But I think what I found working in that space, as someone who isn't I'm not a developer, I can't code, I have to like collaborate with those kinds of people. I think I just found that like often the technology got in the way of the storytelling, so that you would set up an installation or, create some kind of like web art experience, and then like the server wouldn't work, or like the Wi-Fi is down, or I felt like and actually something I like love about filmmaking is that, you literally deliver like a finished file and it works. Like there's kind of that sense that you're still maybe working with technology, but you're not, I think when we look at like immersive experiences, you're not so dependent. And I think now it's kind of sad, like where it is right now in terms of where we're looking at. I don't think that space is as alive and dynamic and diverse as it used to be. I'm definitely like, I think a lot of people just being like really intentional about like, what technology am I engaging with? How am I engaging with it? Like, what's my online footprint? Like, I feel like we're in this era where we're all like, we have fatigue, we have technology fatigue. And I think like navigating that is something that, we'll use technology to solve it. So it's almost like, I think technology ultimately is like neutral. It's just more about what you want to do with it. And as ever, like the idea is at the heart of it. Like, we don't have good ideas, I think the technology is just kind of like pointless. But I mean, it's funny, like what we mostly use technology to do is just connect. And that's the most basic human need. So it's like
the need.
I think it's interesting. I mean, and we with 15 Folds, we kind of thought about bringing it back as like an NFT project. But I have to say, we spoke to like a lot of people in the space, and I just rarely resonated with the people I was speaking to. I just didn't feel, it was like, I mean, yeah, it was kind of like, it was like, I didn't feel like necessarily we were on the same page culturally as the kind of partners we were exploring. And maybe that's just our experience, but I think there's like another horizon that we're approaching with tech, and we're just not there yet. And the kind of conglomerates we're seeing right now, I think there'll be some kind of breakdown from those, and we'll have a sort of like more open space again. But right now, I don't necessarily feel that that's kind of where we're at. I was going to say, I think technology has become so ubiquitous that it's almost something that we don't really think about. It's like the means to an end, but we're so familiar with the means that we just think about the end.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I feel like as well, I think with, I'm a science fiction reader, right? So I have been a science fiction reader forever, basically. And William Gibson and Neuromancer was so important in my life when I was a teenager. And so technology is super interesting for me from a connection point of view. And for my work as well, I need to understand, adoption of technology and what that means for communications, right? Which is what I do. But for me, AI is different because it's a tool still, but it's a tool that learns itself, which is different to us applying a tool like Photoshop or whatever it might be. And that's where the difference is. And that's where we need to be much more careful about what we're doing with this. And I feel like, the difficulties, of course, that there is much more investment and the new, race for, the monopolies to win against the regulations that are out there in a technology that is really different to anything we've seen before. And that for me is the biggest concern, although I am excited about innovation. I also think that this one, we need to really consider the outcome of it in the end, because it's going to be hard we can't just pull the plug on it this time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing, but at the same time, it's like, I love the idea of Web3 behaviors and decentralization. My son, he does that now automatically. He's 14, and they are decentralized by nature. So it's a really, really, really sort of pivotal moment, I think, for my career and I guess yours and anything to do with creativity. And we need to kind of figure out a way of how we can protect creativity at the same time, potentially use technology for innovating that. But I love the idea of, without the idea, it's still a tool at the end of the day, And I totally agree with that.
I think I agree. Like, I think it is still a tool. I think the real question is like, is it really decentralized? I think,
well, no.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think, like it sort of depends. I feel like Web3 is like a wide category, but I do feel like right now we don't know, and there's like plenty of people as well who think that that AI isn't going to deliver on what the expectations of it are. So I think it will be like an interesting period to see, how we really use it, how, what kind of comes out of it. But I think there's also like a level of like, we've been using AI for a long time, we've just not called it that. So there's lots of sort of like layers to it.
Yeah. I totally agree. And it's because I remember, because my career started pre-internet. So I remember as well, it feels kind of familiar and similar, because it is a complete shift in behavior. And that's interesting for me, for what I do. And I, I just am interested in how people communicate with each other and why they do things. So, I think it's super exciting to see what it could be and also just what it should be. You know what I mean? So I think, but, who knows? I think we're in experimentation phase at the moment to try and see what this thing is going forward. But not sure too.
I think your point about the internet, though, that's actually like a really interesting lived experience to have. So like, how I would kind of assume that the way you did things was different, but you still ultimately did the same thing. But right? Is that a kind
We
of
did.
fair takeaway?
So funny. So my team here, who are much younger than me, they were like, "What do you mean you did events without email?" I'm like, "It was called
No, but how did you do that?
invitations
Did you
in
call
the
people
post."
up?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh.
literally invitations in the post. Fashion Week, you know, we faxed information over.
Oh, the
We sent
fact.
transparencies in the post with a franking machine. People of a certain age will remember the franking machine, going down to the post office with like loads of stuff to send to
Yeah, I've
magazines.
heard about
So,
that. It's like
you
when you
know,
mark the
it's,
mail.
yeah, literally, it's all of that. It's kind of like it's a machine that you have in your office that's like paid. It's like stamps, but it's on a little sheet. But you know, but it was also interesting, and I'm happy that I went through that time because I really saw and was part of that evolution. I feel like we're here again, and I feel like I can draw on that experience a bit. You know what I mean? And that's why
Yeah.
you know I feel really comfortable in this change. That's something that I thrive in change. I thrive in a bit of chaos as well.
Yeah.
So for me, it feels super exciting. But because it's a slightly different type of technology than that, it's just something that we have to have a bit more consideration around as well. So let's see, just experimenting with different things at the moment. But yeah, pre-internet. It's really weird to say. Literally pre-social, pre-internet, pre-digital, etc.
Yeah, that's
But yeah, different time. But the team were just like, "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" And so I've got this archive of like actual stuff. Yeah, we'll talk about that another time. Tell me about how you see your work. Do you see it as a reflection of your personal identity? Everything that you do.
Yeah, I mean, I
Or
think
do you?
of
Yeah.
course I do. Yeah, I think it's like I see it as a kind of dance between like my personal identity, my circumstance, you know, the opportunities. It's like I think it's interesting when you know, people are talking about their body of work or the projects that they've done, and I think like you'll know this, like so much of it is like it's actually just about the opportunities you get. It's not just like I think
Absolutely.
you know, obviously there are your certain select projects where you really feel like, you know, you choose to do them, but a lot of the time you're doing them because they're the opportunities that kind of come to you. And I think but in a way that is deeply personal. So yeah, I mean, I think for me, my work is a reflection of who I am because each thing I've done has changed me in a different way. And they've all been these kind of transformative experiences, even if like, you know, that transformation may have been bigger on some of them than on others. It's still been a process of like a journey and a process of change. And I think, you know, to your points, like I feel like I thrive off that change as well.
Yeah, I love it. You know, I feel like things move forward in these moments, or else it can stagnate a bit, you know. And, you know, as humans and as humanity, like things need to move forward, especially in the time that we're in. Can you tell me of a project or piece of work that feels deeply personal or reflective of your story? And I know that you embed your sort of like personal identity into what you do, but is there a project that felt reflective and personal?
Yeah, I made an animated short with Random Acts in probably like 2016. Yeah, it was like the year I moved to New York, called Summer of Hate. And that was kind of the first like narrative piece of work I made. And it's about a kind of young woman who has to like leave the place she's from because of the kind of political chaos in the world that she belongs to. And it's pretty like out there and like experimental in many ways, but I also narrate the story. So I think for me, there was like lots of layers of like really bringing myself into the work in a very like physical way. And it's actually something where like when I look back on it, I can see the seeds of like so many things I'm doing now. So I think really understanding that like, especially when we're like talking about like narrative, long form storytelling, it's like to sustain a creative project of that scale, I think it has to come from you. in whatever way that might show up. But I think you have to deeply feel the subject matter, because it's extensive, and that's kind of what I'm in the process of doing now. Like, I'm working on my debut feature with BFI, which is like a really exciting kind of place to be at. But like, I'm really aware of how this storytelling relates to kind of my own experience, and but also how it doesn't. Like, I think a big part of being creative is like using your own lived experience to kind of take what you're doing in a different direction, or to kind of present it through a new lens. So I do think like the work should always be personal, but it doesn't have to be literal.
Yes. Yeah, I like that actually. Doesn't have to be literal, because I think sometimes it's understanding where it's not about you, you know what I mean? And I think that's
100%.
where, but it still has to be personal. I really love that actually. It's going to be personal, but it's not necessarily literal. Yeah, I'm going to take away into the reflect on that, because I think that's a really nice way to kind of put something that I've been thinking about for a while. Tell me something. Over the years and all of your experiences, how has that evolved? How has this kind of your views on stuff and growth through all the different sort of positives, challenges, how has that shaped your trajectory of your career? So from the beginning to now, you didn't start off as a filmmaker. What was the shift that happened? Or was that just something that was always in you? Or was that shaped somehow through an evolution over the years somehow?
I guess I'm like a really firm believer in like, you don't have to know what you do want to do, but you need to know what you don't want to do. Like, I think that's a much easier kind of place to be. And I think for me, it was like, I really wanted to like make like deeper work where I was like spending more time on projects and just being able to kind of get into like, I wouldn't say my work was superficial, but I think I just wasn't able to kind of get into that depth just because of the kind of time constraints that I was like operating under. Yes. And so kind of post 2020, I just really was in touch with like, it has to be like worth it. It has to be rewarding and meaningful at a level where it like makes me want to get up in the morning and like go and do it, because there's plenty of other things happening. Do you know what I mean? So I think that desire for like depth is, I love working on like just like longer term projects, whether they're like creative direction projects where I like really connect with the brief and I really connect with the team, or on like film projects, whether those are like documentaries, commercials, or kind of like narrative long form. I think there's a desire to kind of just actually make things that like have meaning and are meaningful. And I think that's a place I've only been able to get to by, firstly, like I would say, like when I first graduated from St. Martens and I was like working in kind of animation and gifts and like, clothing design. And I think I was just really trying to figure out, okay, what are my tools? Like, what are the tools I'm using? How can I use them? Like, how can I use them in a way that's different and unique? And then I feel like after that, I kind of had a period of like working more as a creative director, working at Boiler Room, working at Universal Music Group. I worked at Ministry of Sound as well. And that gave me the space to reflect like, okay, what do I want to say and how do I want to say it? Yeah. And I think like kind of coming out of 2020 and like sort of rebuilding my life here, it's been about actually kind of combining those two things and really understanding, not only like what I want to say, but also and how I want to say it, but also like who I want to say it with and like what I want the actual impact to be. I would say like the other big shift for me is just completely like understanding that just things take a long time. And like, like at the beginning of every year, I write like a list of all the things I want to do that year. Sorry.
Right.
And they don't have to be like realistic. Some of them are kind of like a bit blue sky. But when I look at my lists from like 5 years ago, I'm like, just to do like 3 of those things was going to take me 5 years. So it's like
huge. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I think it's just more patience with myself and probably that word of like, giving myself more grace. And yeah, I think just like, but I think a sense of like faith in like my process has been like consistent.
That's good. I mean, do you think, what do you want people to take away from this story? Like, if there was, from a personal, professional point of view, everything you've just talked about, what do you hope others can take away from it? From your experiences,
I think just that, like, yeah, I think for me, it's just about like the fact that you don't have to play by anybody else's rules. Like you can like chart your own path. And I think it's just about believing in yourself and having almost like a level of like maybe a little bit like of naivety. But I think just like it's by any means necessary. Like if there's a place that you want to get to, or if there's like a creative horizon you want to move towards, I think just like don't stop and don't feel like, you can't work part-time at, a bar or a shop or an advertising agency to get to where you want to go. Like, I think there's so much like perfectionism that I hear when I speak to like kind of young people or people coming up, and it's like, it's not perfect. Like we've all done things. That's why I think for me, it's so important to know why you want to do something. Like if there's a place that you want to take your career to or your work to, then know why, you're working, you're freelancing at, XYZ place, because if it's giving you the money to do the thing that you really want to do, then that's what matters. And I think like, you don't have to follow a kind of standardized career path, but if you take that choice, you have to be willing to kind of make compromises, but on your own terms, because you know where you want to get to. And I think that's something that like, I didn't have the confidence necessarily to believe in that when I was like starting out. So for me, a big part of it is just like, have the confidence, like believe that you can do it, but just know that it's going to be hard and it's going to take a while, and you're going to have really have faith in like your own intuition and your own intentions, because that's the kind of compass that you're using.
Yeah. It's funny because my next question was, what would you say to your younger self? Which I think you've just shared with us. Exactly that. The advice feels like, what you'd like people to take away, but it feels a bit like, a note to self as well. Maybe from your younger self and not knowing which way. So I love that. That's just kind of wrapped it really, really nicely. And this importance of staying true to yourself, I think, is really, really key, because I feel like people, they think they need to be someone else or something else. And you can only succeed, for me, if you're on your path, personally. So last question, what now, after all this time, what does success look to you now, considering both your professional achievements and sort of personal fulfillment? What is success for you now? And has that changed from before?
So that's such a great question, because like one of the big reasons I didn't move back to the US was because I was like asking myself, like, why do I want to live in America? And I think as someone who grew up outside of the US, there was this message that like America is the best, like for better or worse, like that was the general like marketing campaign.
Of course.
And, I think tied into that was this idea that like American success is the best success. But I had like been successful in America, but I'd made like a lot of money there, but I wasn't creatively fulfilled. And I didn't actually know that many people I knew people who were either like killing it, making loads of cash, or like maybe they were making creative work they were really passionate about, but they were like really struggling financially. And I just didn't see a kind of, and I kind of, it took a lot, but in a big part of me deciding not to go back was like kind of rejecting that model. So I think success for me is like, it's in a way, it's like a peace. It's like a peacefulness that I can feel about what I'm doing. I think it's like, as someone who's like self-employed, to not have like anxiety around what I'm doing next, where I'm getting paid from next. Yeah, I think success is like almost about having a kind of a timeline of projects like that you feel positive about, and also that allow for you to kind of build out your personal life and your relationships, and like having a kind of work-life balance that like allows for like a really holistic sense of creativity. So
Yeah.
I'd say it's like really around time and how you feel about your future, your present, and also how your kind of day-to-day time maps out.
But it is, because I think success changes over the years, doesn't it? And you know, I guess as you get more experienced as well, you realize really what the priorities are and what success can be. And it's somehow so different. It's just life stage, you know, experience, all the things kind of come together. But thank you so much for your time, Margot. It's always an absolute pleasure to chat to you. Super, super insightful as always. And yeah, I'll see you soon. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you so much. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.